Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
House prosecutors wrapped up their impeachment case against Donald Trump with an impassioned appeal to the Senate to convict the former president of inciting the deadly January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol and bar him from ever holding office again.
The United States imposes sanctions on the leaders of Myanmar's junta and warns of further measures to come as protesters prepare to return to the streets of Yangon, defying warnings from coup leaders.
More than 6 million people were ordered into a snap 5-day lockdown to contain a new coronavirus outbreak in Australia's second most populous state, forcing the Australian Open tennis tournament to Melbourne to shut fans out.
And Tokyo Olympics chief Yoshihiro Mori bowed to mounting pressure and resigned Friday over sexist remarks, leaving a leadership vacuum after opposition emerged to his favored successor.
To the U.S., House impeachment managers wrapped up their case against former President Donald Trump with a warning saying senators who don't ban him from holding public office, he could incite violence again. Relying again on videos of the violence on January 6th, House Democrats sought to break down a key Republican talking point, that President Trump couldn't have known the crowd who gathered to hear him speak would violently swarm the Capitol. Let's listen in.
January 6th was a culmination of the president's actions, not an aberration from them. The insurrection was the most violent and dangerous episode so far in Donald Trump's continuing pattern and practice of inciting violence. But I emphasize so far.
I told them to fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And here's the thing, that wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't rhetorical. He'd already made it perfectly clear that when he said fight, he meant it. We humbly ask you to convict President Trump for the crime for which he is overwhelmingly guilty of. Because if you don't, if we pretend this didn't happen, or worse, if we let it go unanswered, who's to say it won't happen again?
Damage and pain to our capital. Damage and pain to Americans. We won't just close the book and try to move on. We will act to make sure this never happens again. We are not here to punish Donald Trump. We are here to prevent the seeds of hatred that he planted from bearing any more fruit.
For many of the black and brown staff, the trauma was made worse by the many painful symbols of hate that were on full display that day. Insurrectionists waved Confederate flags and hurled the most disgusting racial slurs at dedicated Capitol workers.
Senators, America, we need to exercise our common sense about what happened. Let's not get caught up in a lot of outlandish lawyers' theories here. Exercise your common sense about what just took place in our country.
Senate's adjourned.
The House impeachment managers rested their case after 2 days of arguments that included Trump's own words and hours of graphic video from the assault on the Capitol by Trump supporters who were seeking to halt certification of Democrat Joe Biden's November 3 election victory. Trump's lawyers will begin their defense today, arguing that the former president cannot be held personally responsible for the storming of Congress. They have also argued that the trial itself is unconstitutional because Trump is now out of office, although the Senate rejected that argument earlier this week.
Meanwhile, earlier, U.S. President Biden said the video evidence against his 74-year-old predecessor presented at the Senate trial may change some minds. Biden trying to stop the impeachment trial from overshadowing his push for a huge economic stimulus package and a rebooted fight against COVID-19 said he didn't watch any of the hearing live. Watch this.
I, like other Americans, watched the news. I didn't watch any of the hearing live because I was going straight through last night till a little after 9. But I watched some this morning. I think the Senate has a very important job to complete, and I think my guess is some minds may have been changed, but I don't know.
But despite what even some Republicans have said was a strong prosecution case, Trump retains an unshakable grip on the party, making conviction highly unlikely. It would take a 2/3 majority in the 100-member Senate, meaning 17 Republicans would need to join the chamber's 50 Democrats. The mayhem on January 6 erupted after Trump held a large rally near the White House, insisting falsely, as he had done since losing to Biden in November, that he was cheated. Instructed by Trump to march on Congress, where lawmakers were at that moment certifying Biden's election, the crowd smashed through police lines, then went on a rampage. The chaos left 5 people dead, including 1 woman shot after she invaded the Capitol, and 1 policeman killed by the crowd.
To other news now, huge crowds thronged the cities around Myanmar to demand the return of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi on Friday for a 7th straight day of protests after Washington announced sanctions on the generals behind last week's coup. A torrent of anger and defiance has brought hundreds of thousands of people out in nationwide rallies demanding the country's generals relinquish power. Demonstrations have so far largely been peaceful, but police fired rubber bullets on students while dispersing a sit-down protest in the city of Myanmar, arresting at least 5 people. With teachers, bureaucrats, and air traffic controllers among the government employees walking off the job to demand an end to junta rule, the country's new military leader, Min Aung Hlaing, told striking workers to return to their offices. The new U.S. sanctions target Min Aung Hlaing and other top generals after President Biden announced his administration was $1 billion in funds in the U.S.
Still on that news, UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights warns that any sanctions imposed over the coup in Myanmar must be carefully targeted against those responsible to avoid harming vulnerable people. Watch this.
The seizure of power by the Myanmar military earlier this month constitutes a profound setback for the country after a decade of hard-won gains in its democratic transition. To the international community, I express my concern that any sanctions under consideration should be carefully targeted against specific individuals who are credibly alleged to have violated people's rights. Leaders of this coup are an appropriate focus of such actions.
This is a moment of great peril for the people of Myanmar. It is a moment of truth for all of us. As the people of Myanmar demonstrate their remarkable courage and resolve, let us demonstrate our support of them and the principles and values that they are fighting for. These are the principles and values that are the very foundation of this body, and they are under siege in Myanmar.
Myanmar is undergoing the extremely complex challenges and delicate transition. We do not want to stall our nascent democratic transition in the country. We therefore look forward to receiving better understanding on the prevailing situation in the country and constructive engagement and cooperation from the international community.
Huge crowds have for days thronged cities around Myanmar to demand the return of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi, and there has been concern over harsh police tactics in dispersing the largely peaceful crowds. During Friday's one-day session, diplomats will consider a draft resolution demanding the immediate release of Suu Kyi, who until the coup on February 1st was the country's de facto civilian leader. She was detained with dozens of other members of her National League for Democracy Party, including President Win Myint, ending a decade of civilian rule and triggering international condemnation.
More than 6 million people were ordered into a snap 5-day lockdown to contain a new coronavirus outbreak in Australia's second most populous state. It also forced the Australian Open tennis tournament in Melbourne to shut fans out. The lockdown across Victoria State from midnight was ordered out of fear that a small outbreak of the hyper-infectious UK strain of the virus might spread. Here's Victoria State Premier Daniel Andrews.
Is that if we wait for this theory that it might be out there, there might be more cases than we know about, if we wait for that to be proven correct, it will be too late. And then we will face the prospect of being locked down until a vaccination. There will only be 4 reasons to leave your home: shopping for necessary goods and services, when you need those things, and only what you need. Victorians are well acquainted with this. We've done this before. Victorians know what to do. And they know that these tactics, this type of response works. Masks must be worn everywhere in Victoria other than in your home. Private gatherings, so there will be no visitors to anyone's home. They are not permitted. Public gatherings are not permitted. If you can work from home, then you must work from home. It is better to keep those settings open and allow people to continue, for instance, to work from home or go and do permitted work, given this is a short, sharp circuit breaker rather than a more prolonged set of rules and restrictions.
Small business owners were all the more distraught as the measures come over the weekend when they were counting on big profits to help recover from the earlier lockdown.
Staying in Australia, the Australian Open endured a rocky build-up during the coronavirus pandemic and was hit again Friday as Victoria State ordered a 5-day lockdown from Saturday over a new cluster in Melbourne. Australian Open director Craig Tilley gave assurances that the tournament would continue with players deemed essential workers exempt from lockdown competing in a bubble form. Watch this.
Play will continue. The players will compete in a bubble form not dissimilar to what they've been doing right throughout the year, and the players have all been very good about it. They understand. One thing they cannot do is, one thing that's always great about Melbourne is go around the city, go and visit our great regional Victoria. They won't be able to do that, but that's expected the next 5 days. All of us will be adhering to those restrictions. It will have a financial impact, and that's still to be determined. It has been a very expensive exercise to put this on.
It's very disappointing that we get to miss the tennis, but we did get a bit of it today. So we have to be positive and we have to be grateful for what we have.
I mean, I'm kind of happy about it, to be honest. I feel like in order to get back to normal, that's what we need to do. Like, just have no contact with anyone. I mean, as long as it takes, like, let's do it. I don't want to get to, you know, how America is and stuff. I'd rather just sacrifice a few days.
A ban on fans was announced Friday, with players confined to biosecure bubbles. Victoria State authorities ordered 6 million people in Melbourne and surrounding areas into lockdown to stamp out a new coronavirus outbreak. The lockdown will quickly pose challenges on Friday as high-profile players, including world #1 Novak Djokovic, U.S. Open champion Dominic Thiem, and Australian showman Nick Kyrgios are due to play matches Friday night, with the restrictions looming. Spectators may notably face a scramble to be home before the midnight lockdown takes effect, with play frequently continuing into the early hours.
Now, to revive the economic growth of the country, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque has announced that the IATF has allowed some cinemas and tourist attractions to reopen. Let's listen in.
Inaprobuhan po ng inyong IATF ang pag-relax o pagluwag ng restriction sa mga reliyosong pagtitipon o religious gathering sa mga lugar na nasa ilalim ng General Community Quarantine simula Lunes, 15 ng Pebrero. Pinapayagan na sa mga lugar na nasa GCQ ang religious service na hanggang 50% ng seating or venue capacity. Ang umiiral sa ngayon po ay 30% capacity lamang. Inaproban din po ng inyong IATF sa kanilang huling pagpupulong ang muling pagbubukas o pagpapalawak ng mga sumusunod na negosyo o industriya. Unang-una, driving schools, mga sinihan or traditional cinemas, video and interactive game arcades, libraries, archives, museums at cultural centers, meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions, at limitadong social events at accredited establishments ng Department of Tourism. Inaprubahan din ang muling pagbubukas ng limited tourist attractions tulad ng mga parks, theme parks, natural sites at historical landmarks. Ang muling pagbubukas na ito ay subject sa implementing guidelines na mag-i-issue na magsasabi ng operational capacity at oversight ng appropriate regulatory agency at mga lokal na pamahalaan kung nasaan ang mga negosyo at ang mga industriya. Ang mga nasabing negosyo at industriya ay kailangan pa rin mahigpit na sumunod sa minimum health standards ng Department of Health. Dahil nakikita natin na hindi naman po tumataas ang ating attack rate, no? At hindi naman po masikip o yung ating mga hospital sa ating pagkapuntan. No? In other words, wala po tayong problema pagdating dun sa ating utilization rate. At syempre po, alinsunod dito sa katotohanan na kinakailangan natin magbukas pa ng ekonomiya dahil kinakailangan magkaroon ng karagdagang hanap buhay yung ating mga kababayan. Yung mga nabuksan po nating industriya, marami pong mga nagtatrabaho dyan na matagal nang walang hanap buhay, ngayon po makakapaghanap buhay na sila.
In other news, U.S. President Joe Biden said Thursday the U.S. had signed deals to acquire 200 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses as officials look to immunize the vast majority of the population by July. Watch this.
Plan. This afternoon, we signed final contracts for 100 million more Moderna and 100 million more Pfizer vaccines. We're also able to move up the delivery dates with an additional 200 million vaccines to the end of July, faster than we expected. And we need more people to get vaccinated to beat this pandemic. That's why in the first 3 weeks that I've been in office, we've increased the supply of weekly vaccine shipments to the states by almost 30%. That means millions more Americans will get vaccinated in February than the previous administration was on track to do. When I took office just 3 weeks ago, this country did not have a plan or enough vaccines or people to vaccinate Americans. All Americans, any time, at any point in 2021. Within 3 weeks, round-the-clock work with so many people standing behind me and in front of me, we've now purchased enough vaccine supply to vaccinate all Americans. And now we're working to get those vaccines into the arms of millions of people. While scientists did their job in discovering vaccines in record time, my predecessor, be very blunt about it, did not do his job in getting ready for the massive challenge of vaccinating hundreds of millions of Americans. He didn't order enough vaccines. He didn't mobilize enough people to administer the shots.
Since peaking on January 8, following the holiday season, the U.S. outbreak has been in steep decline with an average of just over 100,000 daily cases, down from more than 300,000. Hospitalizations and fatalities are following suit, but the worst-hit country in the world is still expected to reach the latest grim milestone of 500,000 deaths this month. Between the number of people already vaccinated and the number of people who have already been infected, it's thought that around 40% of the population might have some immunity, which is also contributing to the slowdown in new cases. But while the numbers are headed in the right direction, experts warn it's not time to get complacent. The winter surge was compounded by people gathering over the holidays for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the New Year. And if those patterns were repeated during last Sunday's Super Bowl, we can expect to see a spike. The highly transmissible B.1.1.7 variant that was first identified in Britain is also rapidly spreading in the United States and is set to become the dominant strain by March, according to multiple studies.
In other news, China's broadcasting regulator has banned BBC World News, accusing it of flouting guidelines over a hard-hitting report on Beijing's treatment of the country's Uyghur minority. The decision came just days after Britain's own regulator revoked the license of Chinese broadcaster CGTN for breaking UK law on state-backed ownership and provoked angry accusations of censorship from London. London's decision to offer millions of Hong Kongers a pathway to British citizenship has only further infuriated Beijing, which has accused Britain of behaving with a colonial mentality. London has also angered Beijing by banning Chinese telecoms group Huawei from involvement in its 5G network after the U.S. raised spying fears. In an overnight statement, Beijing's National Radio and Television Administration said BBC World News reports about China were found to seriously violate broadcast guidelines. And that includes the requirement that news should be truthful and fair and not harm China's national interests. It added the administrator doesn't permit the BBC to continue broadcasting in China and doesn't accept its new annual application for broadcast. The BBC said it was disappointed with the move, which applies to mainland China, where the channel is already and restricted to international hotels. Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back to the news. Russia said it would respond in kind if the EU imposes sanctions on Moscow over the jailing of opposition leader Alexei Navalny and a crackdown on protests by his supporters. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell earlier this week said he would propose the bloc impose new sanctions on Russia as he blasted the imprisonment of Navalny and the crackdown. Watch this.
With Russia, the Russian government is going down a worrisome authoritarian route. The space for civil society, freedom of expression continues to narrow, and there seems to be almost no room for development of democratic alternatives. The Russian authorities have shown in the Navalny case that they are merciless in stifling any such attempts.
Borrell made the comments during an address to the European Parliament after a chastening visit to Russia last week, during which Moscow announced the shock expulsion of 3 European diplomats. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said any new sanctions will inevitably be followed by a proportionate response. Navalny supporters have called on the EU to sanction the moneymen they accuse of protecting Putin's wealth and financing his regime. The EU's ties with Russia have been tense since Moscow seized the Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and fueled the war in eastern Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Russia's main Kremlin critic, Alexei Navalny, was back in court on Friday for allegedly defaming a World War II veteran after being ordered to prison in another case that sparked global outrage and mass protests in his country. The hearing came a little over 1 week after the 44-year-old opposition leader, a persistent thorn in President Putin's flesh, was sentenced to serve nearly 3 years in jail. Navalny is accused of describing people who appeared in a video promoting constitutional reforms backed by the Kremlin as the shame of the country and traitors last June. They included a 94-year-old World War II veteran who was present in the court via video link when the trial opened last Friday. The charges currently carry a maximum penalty of 2 years behind bars. Last week, a different Moscow court turned Navalny's 2014 suspended sentence into real jail time, ordering him to serve 2 years and 8 months in prison. Russia's penitentiary service had accused him of breaking the conditions of a suspended sentence for fraud by not checking in with authorities while he was recovering from a nerve agent poisoning attack in Germany that Navalny says was ordered by President Putin.
In other news, at least 6 people were killed and dozens more injured Thursday when about 100 cars crashed in a pileup on an icy freeway in Texas. Let's take a look.
Even for the first responders here, walking is treacherous. For many of us, this is a career event. Many of us have been in this profession for a very long time. We train for this type of a scenario, but you never really expect it to happen.
The preliminary investigation has estimated at least 133 vehicles were involved in the pileup, which stretched at least across a half-a-mile area along I-35. Traffic was backed up even farther along the highway due to the accident. According to AccuWeather, freezing rain was reported around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex on Wednesday night into early Thursday morning, associated with a far-reaching winter storm. Temperatures in the area were in the mid-minus to lower 20s Fahrenheit at the time of the crash. Fort Worth Fire Department spokesman Michael Drivdahl told a news conference the crash was likely caused by icy conditions. He warned the toll could rise as rescue workers were still going through vehicles. Earlier that morning at the scene, the Fort Worth Fire Department stated that multiple people were trapped in the wreckage. The Arlington Police Department responded to more than 80 crashes since Wednesday night. The National Weather Service warned of continued freezing rain and sleet in the area, making for ongoing treacherous driving conditions.
A dog called Blackie is stubbornly hanging around the entrance to a tunnel in northern India where rescuers are searching for people missing after floods triggered by a breaking glacier. An army officer said the dog was likely the pet of someone trapped inside. Take a look.
Meanwhile, from a first-time expectant father to a son whose promised lunch break call never came, relatives of those missing after India's Glacier disaster waited for news and prayed for a miracle. The 27-year-old welder Rawal Silsiwal from Rishikesh in Uttarakhand had 20 days of leave planned next month for the birth of his first child. He was thrilled about the child and had started a countdown until his holiday, said his uncle Vinod Pokhriyal. His wife won't survive the shock of losing him, and that makes us worry about the child. Those missing come from all over India, many of them workers at two of the many hydroelectric dams controversially dotting the ecologically sensitive Himalayan state of Uttarakhand. The disaster saw a barrage of water and debris hurtle down a valley at terrifying speed and with frightening power, sweeping away bridges and roads and hitting two hydroelectric plants. The cause of the disaster is thought to have been a chunk of glacier breaking off. Glaciers have been melting rapidly in the Himalayan region because of global warming.
Meanwhile, Tokyo 2020 Olympics chief Yoshihiro Mori resigned after making sexist comments that caused an international outcry with less than 6 months until the virus postponed games. Take a look.
今回私の不適切な発言が原因で大変混乱をいたしてしまいました。理事の皆さん、さらには評議員の皆様、そして多くの皆様方に大変ご迷惑をおかけをいたしましたことを誠に申し訳なく存じております。今日もちまして会長を辞任をいたそうとこう思っております。大事なことはオリンピックをきちんと7月に開催するということでありますから、そのオリンピックを開催するための準備にですね、私がいることが妨げになるということであってはならないと思います。私はこの組織委員会に入ってから女性の皆さんをできるだけ叩いてきましたし、男性よりも余計女性の皆さんに発言してもらうように絶えず進めてきました。皆さんはなかなかお手を挙げてお話にならない時がたくさんありましたけど、あえてお名前まで申し上げて。
The controversy over Mori's comments has been an unwanted additional headache for organizers already struggling to win over a skeptical public less than 6 months before the games open. Mori's resignation caps over a week of uproar after he told members of Japan's Olympic Committee that women have difficulty speaking concisely, which is annoying. After a 2-hour meeting, Tokyo 2020 organizers said they will form a committee with a 50-50 gender mix to select Mori's replacement. It'll be headed by Canon CEO Fujio Miterai, 85, an appointment that may not appease critics who say key positions consistently go to an entrenched old boy network.
In other news, in a return to the traditional U.S. stance before Donald Trump's presidency, the State Department declares its opposition to further Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Let's listen in.
We believe it is critical to refrain from unilateral steps that exacerbate tensions and that undercut efforts to advance a negotiated two-state solution. Unilateral steps might include annexation of territory, settlement activity, demolitions, incitement to violence, the provision of compensation for individuals imprisoned for acts of terrorism. We have continued to emphasize that it is critical to refrain from all of those activities.
President Joe Biden will talk soon with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but has no specific plan to do so yet, according to the White House, underlining an apparent distancing in the key relationship. Price also said there had been no changes in one of the symbolic moves by Trump, who allowed U.S. citizens to write Jerusalem, Israel in their passports if they were born in the contested city. Price said that the final status of Jerusalem needed to be resolved by the Israelis and Palestinians in direct negotiations. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has already said that the Biden administration will not reverse Trump's landmark decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, which Israel considers its eternal capital.
New Zealand's parliament backs down after ejecting a Maori lawmaker because he refused to wear a tie, allowing him to speak without an accessory he labeled colonial news. The issue flared on Tuesday, February 9, when Maori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi was made to leave from the parliamentary debating chamber for not wearing the required attire during question time. Take a look.
Hia te taura I taku kaki. Kia waiata au I taku waiata.
That is not part of my culture, ties, and it's forcing the indigenous peoples into wearing what I described as a colonial noose.
Question number 3, Dr. Duncan.
As you can clearly see, this attire is business attire as far as I'm concerned, and as far as many New Zealanders and Aotearoa is concerned, this is a tie. This is a tie to my people. This is a tie to the plight. This is a tie to the very reasons why we stand in this place to fight for our rights.
To tell New Zealanders was that there was not a case for using
Eagle News will be right back. Don't go away.
It says the best defense is still containment.
We are in uncharted territory.
Silent volume 450. The time on to 100%. Standing by. Sanctioning.
Back to the news. Britain's economy shrank by a record 9.9% last year on the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic, despite managing strong growth in the second half, according to official data showed today. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak said the economy had suffered a serious shock from the COVID-19 global health crisis. The data came 1 week after the Bank of England forecast economic recovery on the back of Britain's successful ongoing vaccines rollout. Gross domestic product grew 1.0% in the fourth quarter, or 3 months to December, after an upwardly revised third quarter expansion of 16.1%, it added. That data has sparked hope that Britain could avoid a much-feared double-dip recession, despite the new strict lockdown that has been in place since January.
In other business news, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Policymaking Monetary Board kept the central bank's key rate steady as expected given the elevated inflation rate. To date, the BSP's overnight reverse repurchase facility is at record low, 2%, the overnight lending rate at 2.5%, and the overnight deposit rate at 1.5%. Let's listen in.
The Monetary Board noted that inflation is likely to remain elevated in the coming months, reflecting the impact of supply constraints on domestic prices of key food commodities such as meat and vegetables, as well as the recent uptick in international oil prices. At the same time, the latest baseline projections show inflation returning to within the target range of 2 to 4% over the policy horizon as supply-side influences subside. The Monetary Board also noted that inflation expectations continue to be anchored within the inflation target band. The balance of risk to the inflation outlook now appears to be broadly balanced around the baseline path in 2021, but is seen to continue leaning toward the downside in 2022. Tighter supply of meat products, owing in part to the African swine fever outbreak in the country, could lend further upside pressures on inflation. However, the ongoing pandemic may continue to pose downside risk to demand and to the inflation outlook, while recent indicators of activity and sentiment have shown some improvement. The emergence of new variants of the virus and possible delays in mass vaccination programs continue to temper prospects for economic recovery and growth. On balance, the Monetary Board is of the view that the manageable inflation outlook continues to allow the BSP to maintain an accommodative policy stance and thus complement crucial fiscal policy measures.
AstraZeneca, the UK pharma giant, announced its year-end financial results that showed a 10% increase in their revenue. We have JL Bautista of our UK bureau with that story. JL.
AstraZeneca announced Thursday it had doubled its annual profit in 2020 as the World Health Organization approved its coronavirus shot for over 65s, boosting the global immunization effort against COVID-19. Mass vaccination programs are being ramped up in many countries, but have been hampered by limited supplies as rising infections force governments to tighten virus restrictions. AstraZeneca was at the center of a diplomatic spat between the EU and Britain earlier this year over supply problems, and also faced a setback when a number of European nations did not authorize its coronavirus shot for the over 65s, the demographic most vulnerable to COVID-19. Despite a significant impact from the pandemic, we delivered double-digit revenue growth, CEO Pascal Soriot said, as the firm announced a net profit of $3.2 billion in 2020. The progress of the COVID-19 vaccine demonstrated what we can achieve. The World Health Organization backed AstraZeneca's coronavirus shot on Wednesday, including for over 65s and in places where new coronavirus variants are circulating. It is likely that the vaccine will be found to be efficacious in older persons. The trial data indicate that the vaccine is safe for this age group, said World Health Organization expert Alejandro Cravotti. The AstraZeneca shot forms a bulk of doses being rolled out around the world, especially in poorer countries, under the COVAX program, and is considered crucial to the fight against the pandemic, which has claimed more than 2.3 million lives. World Health Organization Chief Scientist Soumya Swaminathan said the benefits of using the AstraZeneca shot would far outweigh any risk even in nations with new variants. Reporting from the United Kingdom, this is J.L. Bautista. We live in interesting times.
China's space agency released video footage from its spacecraft circling Mars on Friday, 2 days after it successfully entered the planet's orbit in Beijing's latest ambitious space mission. Take a look. In the video published by state broadcaster CCTV, the surface of the planet is seen coming into view out of a pitch black sky against the outside of the Tianwen-1, which entered the orbit of the red planet on Wednesday. White craters are visible on the planet's surface, which fades from white to black through the video as the probe flies over the course of one Martian day, according to official news agency Xinhua. The 5-ton Tianwen-1, which translates as Questions to Heaven, includes a Mars orbiter, a lander, and a solar-powered rover, and launched from southern China last July. It's the latest step in Beijing's space program, which aims to establish a crewed space station by 2022 and eventually put an astronaut on the moon, and has opened up a new extraterrestrial arena for U.S.-China competition.
Finally, in our news, Malu Francisco from our EBC European Bureau shows us some images of people of all ages celebrating the winter weather. Watch this.
And it's windy. If ever you hear some background noise, it is the wind. Some countries in the world have 4 seasons in a year: winter, spring, summer, and fall. When it's winter here in the northern hemisphere, it is summer in the southern hemisphere. Of the 4 seasons, winter is the coldest season. Nevertheless, it is still a fascinating and gorgeous season of the year. In fact, it's one of the seasons the people living in those countries are waiting for, to see and experience the snow.
Snow is fun. Schnee macht Spaß. Yay!
Despite COVID-19 and with the new norm, social distancing, we still manage to stay connected with our friends. Today, let's find out what some of our friends are doing to enjoy the snow on a cold winter day. Let's visit 2 families in Berlin. Hallo Gerd. Hallo.
Hallo, ich bin Gerd.
Hallo in German is the German word for hello. Oh, a little bit of German course. Hi, Gert. Tell us a bit about the weather at the time you're recording this.
I like to show you how beautiful is Berlin in a white dress.
Aktuell minus 9 Grad. Ich habe eine gemessene Stelle von 13 Zentimeter gehabt. Und es schneit seit gestern bis heute Abend durch. Und es wird bis zu minus 11 Grad noch.
I am Annalyn Luhmann of Berlin, Germany. I love taking pictures of nature on springtime, summertime, autumn, or even on snowy days or winter time.
Hallo Leute, ich bin Lukas. Da schneit ein bisschen. Und das ist sehr schön. Ich mag es!
Let's visit another family here in Berlin. Let's go over to Alvin's place. Hallo Seth. Hallo Shane, wie geht's? Wait, Their dad, Alvin, is quite busy. Let's see what he's up to. He's trying to make a snow sculpture. Let's see what it's all about. Wait. It is not the regular snowman. Oh, that is the Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a famous icon of the capital city of Denmark, Copenhagen. The Little Mermaid is actually based on the fairy tale of the same name by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, written in 1837. To a cold snow day, a hot soup or a hot tea. We'll continue to stay connected with our friends and find out how they're enjoying their snow days. Join us again for the sights and sounds in different countries as our friends enjoy their snow days. In the Netherlands, I'm Marilu Francisco. We live in interesting times.
I love it, Marilu. Thank you for that feature.
I want to have soup now. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
And before we go, I just got word from Deutsche Welle that China's CGTN no longer has permission to broadcast in Germany. And CJ and I will bring you more updates as we follow this developing story. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.